The weight of a human soul was measured once. It happened in a sealed room on a spring morning in the year 1907. The instrument used was an industrial scale. The subject was a dying man, and what the doctor recorded still divides science and faith to this day. The case you're about to hear was concealed for decades. Before we begin, write in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is at this exact moment. In the city of Haverhill, Massachusetts, there lived a physician named Duncan McDougall. He was 43 years old. He had studied in Boston. He had worked in sanitariums, and in the spring of 1901, he began preparing an experiment that no medical institution would approve. He wanted to weigh the soul, not metaphorically, not symbolically. He wanted to place a dying human being on a scale and measure the exact moment when life left the body. He believed the soul had mass. He believed it could be quantified, and he believed that if he could prove it, he would change everything. For 6 years, he searched for the right conditions. He needed patients who were dying slowly. He needed consent from families. He needed a room where no one would interfere. And in 1907, he finally found what he was looking for. A boarding house on the edge of town had been converted into a private care facility. The building was 3 stories tall. The windows faced a cemetery, and in a room on the 2nd floor, a man was dying of tuberculosis. His name was never recorded. His age was estimated to be between 50 and 55 years old. He had no family. He had no visitors. And according to the attending nurse, he had been bedridden for 11 months. His breathing was shallow. His pulse was faint. And Dr. McDougall believed he had less than a week to live. On the morning of April 10th, 1907, the doctor arrived at the boarding house with a custom-built apparatus. It was a wooden platform mounted on a finely calibrated beam scale. The scale was sensitive to within 0.2 of an ounce. It had been tested with known weights, and it had been placed in the center of the room, away from drafts or vibrations. The dying man was moved onto the platform. He weighed 140 pounds and 3.5 ounces. The doctor recorded the number in a leather-bound journal. He sat in a chair beside the bed, and he waited. The nurse remained in the room. She did not speak. She adjusted the pillow twice. She checked the man's pulse every 15 minutes. And at 9:40 in the morning, she whispered that his breathing had changed. Dr. McDougall leaned forward. He watched the needle on the scale. He noted the time. And for the next 3 hours and 17 minutes, nothing happened. But then, at exactly 12:56 in the afternoon, the man exhaled. His chest did not rise again. His eyes remained half open, and the needle on the scale moved. It dropped, suddenly, sharply, and it stopped at a new position. The doctor stood. He checked the scale. He recalibrated the weights, and he recorded the result in his journal with a steady hand. The body now weighed 140 pounds and 0 ounces. 3.5 ounces had disappeared. The nurse stared at the scale. She asked if something had fallen. The doctor shook his head. He examined the platform. He checked the floor. And he found nothing. No fluid had leaked. No gas had escaped. No object had been displaced. He wrote in his journal, "The loss occurred at the moment of death. No physical explanation could account for it. The weight simply vanished." But Dr. McDougall was not finished. Over the next 2 years, he repeated the experiment 5 more times. He used different patients. He used different scales, and he recorded the results with the same meticulous detail. In 4 of the cases, the weight loss occurred instantly at the moment of death. In one case, the weight dropped gradually over several minutes. And in the final case, the scale showed no change at all. The doctor did not publish this last result immediately. He included it later in a footnote, and he offered no explanation for why it differed. In 1907, he submitted his findings to the journal American Medicine. The article was titled Hypothesis Concerning Soul Substance Together with Experimental Evidence of the Existence of Such Substance. It was published in April, and it caused an immediate reaction. Some physicians called it groundbreaking, others called it absurd. The editor of the journal received dozens of letters. Some praised the doctor's courage, others accused him of blasphemy. And within weeks, the story had spread beyond medical circles. Newspapers across the United States picked up the story. Headlines ranged from curious to sensational. "Doctor Weighs the Soul" appeared in the Boston Herald. "Scientific Proof of the Spirit" ran in a Pennsylvania daily. And "The Soul Has Weight" was printed in a religious newsletter in Ohio. But not everyone was convinced. A physician named Augustus Clark wrote a rebuttal in the same journal. He argued that the weight loss could be explained by the sudden evaporation of moisture from the lungs. He noted that a dying body releases heat, and he suggested that this heat could cause a rapid loss of water vapor, measurable on a sensitive scale. Dr. McDougall responded. He argued that moisture loss would occur gradually, not instantly. He pointed out that the weight drop happened at the exact moment of death, not before or after. And he insisted that his measurements were too precise to be explained by evaporation alone. The debate continued for months. Letters were exchanged. Theories were proposed, but no one repeated the experiment. No hospital would allow it. No ethics board would approve it. And Dr. McDougall himself never attempted it again. He did, however, conduct one final series of tests. In the summer of 1907, he decided to weigh animals at the moment of death. He believed that if the soul was unique to humans, then animals would show no weight loss. He used 15 dogs. Each dog was anesthetized with ether. Each was placed on the same beam scale, and each was observed until breathing stopped. The results were recorded in a separate journal. Dr. McDougall noted that in every case, there was no measurable change in weight at the moment of death. He concluded that animals did not possess souls, or if they did, their souls had no mass. This second experiment was never formally published. It was mentioned briefly in a letter to a colleague, and it was later cited in a religious pamphlet distributed in New England in 1908. But the photograph, that came later. In 1911, a set of images began circulating among members of the American Society for Psychical Research. The images were grainy. They were printed on heavy paper, and they claimed to show something extraordinary, a faint mist rising from the body of a deceased patient. The photographs were attributed to Dr. McDougall. They were labeled "Soul Substance Captured During Transition," and they were displayed at private gatherings in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. But there was a problem. Dr. McDougall never claimed to have taken those photographs. He never mentioned them in his journals. And when asked about them in 1912, he denied any involvement. He stated, in a written response to the Society, that he had never attempted to photograph the soul. He had only weighed it, and he expressed concern that the images were being used to misrepresent his work. So where did the photographs come from? Some researchers believe they were created by a French spiritualist named Hippolyte Baraduc. Baraduc had been experimenting with spirit photography since the 1890s. He claimed to have captured images of emotional energy, and in 1907 he published a book that included photographs of what he called vital fluids leaving the body at death. The images were strikingly similar to those attributed to Dr. McDougall. It is possible that someone in the United States saw Baraduc's work and conflated it with McDougall's soul-weighing experiment. It is possible that the attribution was accidental, or it is possible that someone wanted the two stories to merge, because together they formed something more powerful than either one alone. A photograph gave the soul a shape, a scale gave it a weight, and together they suggested that the invisible could be made visible. By 1915, the story had taken on a life of its own. Religious groups cited the experiment as proof of the afterlife. Skeptics dismissed it as flawed science, and spiritualists incorporated it into seances and lectures across the country. But Dr. McDougall himself withdrew. He stopped giving interviews, he stopped corresponding with researchers, and in 1920 he closed his private practice in Haverhill and moved to a rural town in western Massachusetts. He died there in 1928. He was 70 years old, and according to his death certificate, he passed away from heart failure in his home on a Saturday morning in June. No obituary mentioned the soul-weighing experiment. No medical journal published a retrospective, and his personal journals were never found. In 1934, a researcher from Harvard University attempted to locate McDougall's notes. He contacted the boarding house in Haverhill. He spoke with surviving family members of the patients, and he searched hospital records across Massachusetts. He found nothing. The boarding house had been demolished in 1919. The scale had been sold to a scrapyard, and the leather-bound journal had disappeared. Some believe it was destroyed deliberately, others believe it was lost in a fire, and a few believe it was taken by someone who wanted the experiment to remain unverified. In 1949, a theology professor in Maine claimed to have seen a copy of McDougall's journal in a private collection in Boston. He described it in a letter to a colleague. He mentioned specific dates, he mentioned specific weights, but when asked to provide proof, he said the collection had been sold. The buyer was never identified. In 1962, a researcher in England attempted to replicate the experiment. He used modern equipment. He worked with terminally ill patients in a hospice, and he recorded the results over a period of 3 years. He found no measurable weight loss at the moment of death. His report was published in a medical journal in 1965. It concluded that Dr. McDougall's findings were likely the result of equipment error or environmental factors, and it recommended that the soul-weighing experiment be considered a historical curiosity, nothing more. But the story did not end. In 1973, a documentary filmmaker in California interviewed a retired nurse who claimed to have worked at the boarding house in Haverhill in 1907. She was 91 years old. She lived in a care facility in San Diego, and she said she remembered the doctor with the scale. She described the room, she described the platform, and she described the moment when the needle moved. She said, "I thought the scale was broken, but the doctor, he just smiled, and he wrote something in his book, and he said, 'We just witnessed the impossible.'" The filmmaker asked if she believed the soul had been weighed. The nurse paused. She looked out the window, and she said, "I believe something left that room. Whether it was a soul, I cannot say, but something left." The interview was recorded on audio tape. It was included in a documentary that aired on public television in 1974, and it was the last known testimony from anyone who claimed to have been present during the experiment. The nurse died 3 months after the interview. The filmmaker moved to Europe, and the audio tape was archived in a university library in San Francisco. It can still be accessed today. The recording lasts 11 minutes and 43 seconds, and in the final minute, there is a sound, a faint rustling, like paper being turned, or fabric brushing against a microphone. Some listeners believe it was just background noise, others believe it was something else. In 1977, a physicist in Oregon published a paper titled Mass Energy and Consciousness, a re-examination of the McDougall hypothesis. He proposed that if consciousness had a quantum basis, then it might theoretically possess measurable mass. He did not conduct any experiments, he did not cite any new evidence, but he argued that the question itself was still worth asking. The paper was largely ignored by the scientific community. It was mentioned briefly in a popular science magazine in 1978, and it was referenced in a philosophy lecture at a college in Vermont the following year. But the physicist himself never published another paper on the subject. When asked why, in a radio interview in 1979, he said, "Some questions are more valuable unanswered because the moment we stop asking, we stop wondering, and wonder is what keeps us human." The last known reference to Dr. McDougall's experiment appeared in a medical ethics textbook in 1979. It was included in a chapter on historical experiments that would not be permitted under modern ethical standards. It mentioned the scale, it mentioned the weight loss, and it concluded with a single sentence: "The results remain unexplained." No further studies were authorized, no further testimonies were recorded, and the original scale was never recovered. Some say it was melted down during the war effort in 1942, others say it was sold to a collector in Europe, and a few say it is still in Massachusetts, in the basement of a building that no longer has a name. The photograph that was never taken still circulates online. It appears on websites about the paranormal. It appears in documentaries about the afterlife. And it is always attributed to Dr. Duncan McDougall. But the truth is simpler. The doctor weighed a dying man. The scale recorded a change, and no one has ever been able to explain it. The last entry in a journal believed to be McDougall's was dated June 19th, 1928. It was written in pencil, the handwriting was unsteady, and it read, "If I am wrong, I will know soon enough." He died the next morning. Some say the soul weighs 3.5 ounces, others say it weighs nothing at all, and the rest prefer not to speculate.